Welcome to Between Two Chairs, Demystifying Commercial Real Estate, the podcast that brings you the latest insights and trends on the South Florida commercial real estate market, with your hosts, Fernando Arencibia Jr. and Jennifer Woolman. In each episode, we dive into the world of commercial real estate and break down complex concepts to make them accessible for everyone. Whether you're a real estate professional, a curious investor, or just interested in the South Florida market in general, Between Two Chairs is the podcast for you. So pull up a chair and join us.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Between Two Chairs. My name is Fernando Arencibia Jr., and with me, as always, is the tree hugger that is Jennifer Woolman. Jennifer, say hi.
Hi.
Jennifer, you could say that proudly. There's nothing wrong with hugging a tree every once in a while.
You're supposed to for something. I can't remember what. I have a girlfriend who says you're supposed to hug a tree every day.
Yeah. I mean, people don't know, but, you know, Jennifer is from San Francisco originally. So, you know, there's a lot of hugging of trees.
With a degree in environmental management, so go figure.
There you go. And then she went into waste management.
Exactly.
And became a boss. I love it. So, Jennifer, we are going to do one of our favorite things, which is the kindergarten series. And today you have brought us the Lorax. Ooh, I like it.
By Dr. Seuss.
My apologies, guys. I'm so sorry. With words like sneeze, I think you would understand that it is the Dr. Seuss, but yes, the Lorax by Dr. Seuss. So, Jennifer, tell me, pray, tell us all, why have you decided to bring the Lorax into the conversation on a commercial real estate podcast?
Well, because you love these pretzel exercises.
I do.
Because next week is Earth Day.
Ah, okay.
And I think that Miami is blessed with one of the most amazing environments of any place that I've ever lived. And I've lived in some pretty spectacular and beautiful places. And, you know, we're super popular right now. Everybody's building like crazy. We're increasing density. And so I found some parallels and some warnings with the Lorax. So a quick recap, and I might mispronounce some of these made-up words.
Oh, man, I can't wait to hear them.
So the narrator in the book finds a beautiful place with truffula trees, which are silky trees. They have a silky canopy and they smell great. So what does he do? He chops down the tree and he needs a thneed. And who needs a thneed? Well, a thneed apparently is needed by everybody. So he's knitting this thneed and a Lorax pops out on the chopped down tree trunk and he says, I speak for the trees. And he says, you can't chop down these trees. Nobody's going to buy a thneed. Well, while he's saying that, somebody comes in and buys a thneed for like $3.50. And so the narrator's off and running. He's like, oh, I'm going to make a ton of money. So he calls his family and all of his friends and family move there and they start chopping down trees and his business is growing super, super rapidly. And so the Lorax pops up again and says, hey, you know, I not only speak for the trees, I speak for the barbaloots who eat the fruit from the trees. And you've chopped down so many trees that these poor barbaloots are starving. So now I have to send them away. And he says, oh, so sad. You know, I'm sorry for the barbaloots, but I'm making tons of money and business is business and business must grow. So he biggers, his word, not mine. See, that's why I have a problem with the grammar. So he biggers his factory, the roads, etc., and starts shipping thneeds like crazy. You guys, this is hard.
Yeah.
They're all tongue twisters. So he starts shipping thneeds like crazy, and he biggers the money he makes. And then the Lorax comes back and says, I also speak for the Swanee Swans and the glubbity-glub fish or whatever, and you've polluted the air, you've polluted everything, so everyone has to leave. So he's like, so sorry, but I'm doing great, making tons of money. And so finally the day comes when they chop down the last tree. And once they chop down the last tree, there's no more needs to make. So they close down shop. The family moves away to go make money somewhere else. And the narrator stays. He's depressed by what he sees around him. You know, the Lorax is long gone, but then the Onceler, who we never meet, we only meet at the very beginning of the book, gives him a truffula seed so he can plant the tree and regrow what he has destroyed. You know, I look at what we have here, you know, and a lot of what Miami has is water, right? We have the Everglades to the west, we have Biscayne Bay to the east, and those are also part of what makes people come here, right? Biscayne Bay is a huge economic engine for Florida between fishing and tourism and everything else, as well as an incredible asset for the people who live here. And the Everglades and, you know, our water quality between the Everglades and Biscayne Bay, and the Biscayne Bay Aquifer, that's our drinking source. So we have certain protections. Miami-Dade County has the urban development boundary that was developed about a century ago and it's just a line that was designed to protect the Everglades wetlands and farms from development. And there's been pressure by developers to move that boundary so they can get the cheaper land. And it's not because we don't have available land in Miami-Dade County. We do. We're not a super, super dense county with the exception of, you know, downtown Miami-Dade, or downtown Miami, excuse me. So, but the land out there would be cheaper because it's still agricultural and would need to be rezoned, et cetera. And several, you know, big money has been pushing to move the UDB, and it actually went to the state legislature this year, which luckily it got voted down, but where they were going to take away the authority of the county, and not just our county, but other counties in the state or cities in the state who might want to do some anti-development boundaries. And it's not, in my opinion, it's not anti-development, and it's not environmental activism, it's stewardship, right? It's trying to keep what makes where we live great, while at the same time allowing for building and construction to accommodate the new demands and the amount of people who want to live here and address the issues such as affordability, transportation, et cetera. Yeah. So,
you know, interesting, because when I read the Lorax, you know, this book was published in 1971. Mm-hmm. And I remember growing up in school, there was a lot of conversation about the effects to the environment of, especially, you know, manufacturing, really, until we, you know, burn a hole in the ozone layer. Mm-hmm. And I remember that was a big part of the conversation, and the big fear was about this expanding and eventually not having the protection of the ozone layer in our atmosphere. And so, you know, a lot of what you see in this, you know, conversation in the book does come to fruition. I mean, there is a lot of there's a lot of things that are in this book that you see happening, you know, and it's really a book about the warning signs, right, mm-hmm. of overproduction. And to your point, it's not about not developing, but it is more about the stewardship over our natural resources and making sure that we do it, you know, responsibly. Over the last, you know, 6 years, I've seen how the state of Florida has, you know, and through the budget, invested a lot of money in water quality. You know, the conversation whenever you see anyone speak about it is, hey, listen, we don't have mountains, you mm-hmm. know, but we have beaches and we have waterways, and we need to protect those. And people don't come here for the mountains, right? They come here for the water. There is a lot to be said about the importance of addressing those issues. And I think it's a very, you know, it's a very telling story about how to develop, you know, how important it is to have consistency in our development practices that are, to your point, are done responsibly so that we could continue to grow.
Well, and I think a lot of developers and investors just think, what can I build here? Like, what is the most I can build here? What is the maximum I can build? How can I get the most out of this property, make the biggest return? And I think that's the wrong way to think about development if you're thinking about the long term. And we talked about generational wealth recently and legacy building. And I think legacy thinking needs to go into development as well. And instead of thinking, what can I build here? It's more of like, what should I build here? Because in another interview that we did, I start seeing the connections of some of the conversations when I start talking about this book so not only is it the responsibility of the developers, it's the responsibility of the residents and the communities too, because in the interview we did with South Miami Mayor Javier Fernandez, he spoke about how the short-sightedness of the residents and the government at the time and the NIMBYism of about a decade or so ago resulted in people didn't want 8 stories, right? That could have been thoughtfully done. It was a very well-known urban planner. I believe it was Dover and Cole. I think it was already Dover and Cole at the time, but I know Dover's the one who he mentioned, did this very thoughtful urban plan where certain areas, more of the commercial areas, were going to have 8-story buildings, and both the residents and the government said no way. Well, guess what? Now it's really, really dense because now that same land you can't afford to build 8 stories. So now it's 16 stories. So that was an issue where the developers back then would have done 8 stories if they could have done 8 stories. But the community pushed back. So that was irresponsible of the community, right? People move into a community and then they don't want anyone else to move in and they don't want anything else to change. So I thought that was really interesting. And
so I'm going to push back on something you mentioned. I do agree that I think a developer has a responsibility to maximize the value of the land and to make sure that the deal pencils out. I mean, that's...
Oh, the deal has to pencil out or it's not going to, or they're not going to build it and not make it, but you can still make a profit doing something that's not maybe...
Yeah, where I'm going to agree with you is that how that happens, in other words, what ends up being built there has to be a conversation. And there are 3 parties to this conversation. One, you already mentioned. 2, you already mentioned, the developer and the people that live there, the community. The other one is the zoning and planning department, which is why we always say that, affordability really, affordable housing and responsible development, all roads begin and end at the planning and zoning department, which is why it's often frustrating to many of us that you're not going to find a lot of ingenuity sometimes and a lot of creativity there unless you have the orchestrated combination of the mayor and the council and the planning and zoning department that are all in alignment. I will give you an example. North Beach is a place that gets a lot of pushback from its community for development. It's also a place where, there are times of the year with king tides and all that stuff where you see flooding that is happening. And, I don't know about you. I haven't heard a lot of conversation about sea level rise, but what was it, 7 years ago? It was the topic du jour, and it was going to come for all of us, and we needed to address it. And I remember that there were some developments in phase at the city of in North Beach, or the city of Miami Beach in North Beach. And the conversation was, we feel that if we build the building the way that you're telling us to build it, it's going to be obsolete before we knew it. Because what the developers were understanding is that they perhaps were going to lose the entire first floor. Right, that they needed to elevate it to a point where they needed to lose the entire first floor, especially because there was conversation about elevating the entire streetscape. And then if I build a building now and now you elevate the streetscape, now it becomes the first floor kind of becomes like a basement, but you're going to see half of the first floor and the other half and all that stuff. And the conversation that developers were having is, guys, let's be responsible here. We're going to not develop the first floor. Right, we're gonna do the elevation, right? So access to parking, people coming in, and all that stuff, And of course, we are gonna have a lobby, but we're gonna develop the first floor. Give me an extra floor on the top end, in order for me to make the deal pencil out. And then that became the developers are pushing for the extra floor, but that's where it becomes very difficult to have some real conversation about what is the best thing to develop there, because you get stuck, people get entrenched into their own corners, and they don't see that if you have more of a conversation, a developer is taking a huge risk, and the developer wants to minimize that risk as much as they can and wants to build something that outlasts. And I don't think that there's a lot of developers out there that are not looking to, when they have their name on the project, for the project to come out looking great, right? But sometimes you're limited by the circumstances, and people that are not willing to have that fight are going to just build whatever they're allowed to build.
Right. And this isn't by any means anti-development, obviously,
no, not
or
at all.
Anti-investor. We know the deals need to pencil out. And to your point, I think the community and the government need to work to make what they want built there.
And you know what's funny? I don't know I'm sure you've been to Savannah, Georgia. So Savannah is a beautiful city. Savannah is one of the first, in the history of America, one of the first cities that was designed from its inception. Every other city, started with one block and then it kind of sprawled out, and then there was some intentionality. But this is a city that was intentionally designed. That's why you have those beautiful, not courtyards,
the squares.
The squares, those beautiful
parks.
squares and all those stuff. Everything there is so beautifully done. But there are a couple of squares where you find these blocked buildings that are very industrial-like, that were built in the 70s, and you're like, man, that is such an eyesore. Well, it was developed by the federal government. They're federal offices.
Right.
And they didn't have to abide by the standards of the community, by the standards of the zoning, and that also is a problem, right? Because you don't want to have total autonomy and say, well, I'm just going to build the most economic, straightforward building. I just need offices. It barely has windows. It's probably a terrible place to work in anyway, because they weren't thinking about that in the 70s. They're just looking at, to say that they were looking at function over form is not even the right thing, because I don't even think that they were looking at function, because people have, somehow diluted the idea that form doesn't have a functional aspect of it, and now we want high ceilings in the lobbies, and we want plenty of light and all that stuff, because people realize we spend our lives in these buildings, those people that work there. So these things have become important. So there is a balance to be had with industry, with development, and, more and more what we need is to have realistic conversations about its development, especially in our city, which is why I appreciate you bringing this on, because I feel like everybody, it's in the ether. People are talking about it. We're in a crossroads where we are, definitely a success story from the point of view of everybody has discovered Miami. There's a lot of growth. There's a lot of influx, migration, with a lot of deep pockets and a lot of investment in Miami. We've never had the investment for example, in our charity, overall, as we've had over the last 5 years. There's been a lot of positives. But what people are very concerned with is how we're going to grow responsibly, from here.
Right. And I think one of the things is are people building to build, fill up, and then flip? Or are they building to hold? Because there's a big difference between building and to flip and just make your money and leave and on to the next project than there is building to hold. And DeLeah Becker with Becker Commercial out of Austin had a beautiful quote on a LinkedIn post that she wrote. And she wrote, this is a quote: "Real estate is not just a transaction. For an owner, it is stewardship. It is durability. It is thinking about today while preparing for what the building will need tomorrow." And I thought that was a perfect kind of summary of the Lorax and sustainability and responsible CRE ownership.
And it's really interesting because, yesterday, I know Pinecrest lost court case. Basically, what they were found to have, let's just say that they were asking people that wanted to develop on their own land to give up portions of their land to other projects, and in order to get the projects approved. And some of these are small developments. We're not talking about, a huge thing. It's not like, Pinecrest is known to have that density, right? And now they're on the hook for like $500,000 of losses that those people have incurred. So that's the other side of it is, how does a city, and how does a county and how do we overall look at to encourage the kind of development that we want without doing those kind of draconian things to a degree, right? And it takes two to tango. That's going to be a big part of the conversation. And that's why I think any quality, mayor or commission, that they really should focus on that part of, what's happening in the planning and zoning departments, because, it's not only about speed, but it's about just having the right conversation. I also will say that one of the things that we always speak about in this podcast and throughout is the importance of advocating for the things that matter to the people that we serve. And I think that the sentence at the end of the Lorax says it beautifully, which is, unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better. It's just not. The good news is that I think that we have a lot of people that care an awful lot.
Agreed.
About what happens to our city and our county and South Florida overall, and how we grow and how we, improve upon things. So, definitely it's an exciting time to be here because there's just a lot going on.
And there's a lot of cool stuff going on, and we're so lucky to live here.
Yeah, no, it's incredible. Absolutely. All right, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We love to do these kindergarten books because, we believe in that. I don't know if you ever, when you were a kid, if you walked into your kindergarten and they had a sign, and the sign says everything I learned in kindergarten. And so I think that these books have a lot to teach us. And it's not just because Jennifer is a very proud grandma and she keeps reading these books with her grandbabies, which are expanding.
I'm really simple, and if you explain anything beyond kindergarten level, I'm lost. So
I don't think anybody is buying this, Jennifer. Nobody is buying that you're simple.
Yeah, explain it at a kindergarten level so I can understand.
I love it. Well, everybody, thank you. If you have a recommendation of a book, we would love to hear it. And once again, thank you for your support and listening to us any way that you consume this podcast. I hope it is a blessing to you guys. God bless you all. And until next time, goodbye.
Hey.